Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fuuri, your host with the most, here to tell you a story about titties and doggies. However, before we can do that, let me get my party poppers. Because we reached over 150 subscribers. It's a great show of support and I sincerely thank you all for it. What's more, if this video gets posted on schedule, it will also be November 16th, the summon day for today's Housamo hero. You know what that means? More party poppers. You know, I'm beginning to think this isn't a party popper. Should have known something was up when that cop asked if I saw anyone with a gun in that alleyway. Regardless of my potential aiding and abetting a crime, let's keep this momentum going if you don't mind liking and subscribing. Today's Housamo hero is Hakumen's bodyguard. Butler? Whipping boy? It's Xolotl. Spoiler alert for chapters 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10, and before you ask, yes, that is how Xolotl's name is pronounced. I know we're doing another transient from El Dorado, but Xolotl was the most recommended one in the comments, so that's just how the crumble cookied. Be sure to comment whichever transient you want me to do next as I begin today's video. We don't know his rule or role, but we do know that his sacred artifact are the jewels wrapped around his arm. It lets him grow and manipulate plant life despite actually being a wind jewel. It's explained in his 4 stars entry, which says, the intertwined vines are symbolic of the winds and the trees that connect heaven and earth. He's also the reason why you should remember that appearances can be deceiving. You see, despite his appearance, Xolotl is actually a, cowardly crybaby, to quote his own entry. This ties quite well into Xolotl's real-life myths as a pretty major Aztec god. Although it's weird he's working for Hakumen when he is way more important in his respective mythology. Not even just in the myths, but also in game as Tezcatlipoca's brother. It's like if the third in line for the British crown was a CEO's secretary. Although his job as a bodyguard does make sense considering the myth, but let's introduce Xolotl properly. The real Xolotl is the Aztec god of death, and twins, and misfortune, and deformities, and dusk. Pretty busy guy. His major role in the mythology is, surprise surprise, as a bodyguard. However, rather than protecting a fox, his job was to guide the souls of the dead and the sun through the underworld when it's set at night. Xolotl has 2 major stories, one I'll get to later and one I'll get to now. You see, Aztec mythology works on the 5 sun model, stating that there have been 5 other worlds before this one. During the 5th cycle, the gods were supposed to sacrifice themselves to make the sun, but Xolotl ain't got time for that. He ran away and cried so much that his eyes fell out, and that is like legit horrifying. And Xolotl's day only got worse. You see, after the sun was made, it wasn't moving, so the wind god starts massacring the other gods to get it started. Xolotl, being understandably horrified of this, goes through 3 transformations to hide himself. The first being a mace plant with 2 stalks, a Xolotl, then as a Maguey plant, a Mexolotl, and finally as an amphibious creature, an Axolotl. It's a shame that none of that helped in the end as he still got sacrificed. This story is basically lifted verbatim for Xolotl's backstory in game, save the whole, you know, dying part. As I mentioned in the last video, Xolotl and Hombre Tigre's homeworld of El Dorado is a world based on sacrifice. Also, shameless plug, please give the video a watch by clicking the card in the top right. Just like the myth, transient Xolotl was supposed to be sacrificed, but he cried his eyes out and somehow ran away to Tokyo. In Tokyo, he found a job as Hakumen's bodyguard, joining the Roppongi Tycoons. Now that we're caught up on Xolotl's past and the myth that inspired it, let's look at his role in the main quest. Strangely, despite being Hakumen's bodyguard, he isn't in Chapter 5 when Hakumen's casino is attacked. We first see him in Chapter 6 when Licht baits him into going to Kabukicho. In Kabukicho, we learn of his cowardice that conflicts with his unwavering loyalty towards Hakumen. He ends up in the same cell as the summoners and even tags along for their escape. He reunites with Hakumen as the exception happens and wishes the player farewell once it's all over. He's barely in Chapter 7, happily reuniting with Hakumen after she was replaced by her shadow. Next, in Chapter 9, you see him at Kamata picking up an item from the crafters for his mistress. The item ends up being a brand new set of eyes that Hakumen gifted Xolotl. With those eyes, for the first time he realizes the player is the reincarnation of his brother Quetzalcoatl. He gives you a warning about Tezcatlipoca, telling you to be careful before heading back to Roppongi. And in Chapter 10, he delivers information about Quetzalcoatl to the player. Finally, we have the hot paradise of Hell event, which I will save for later so we can finally move on. Life Wonders put a lot, and I mean a lot, of inspiration behind Xolotl. The entire story of Xolotl being a sacrifice was basically lifted entirely, even taking the part about Xolotl crying his eyes out. Life Wonders even made his sacred artifact as a reference to the conch necklace the Aztec Xolotl carried. The phrase he uses during his charge skill, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. My point being is that it's the name of two Aztec gods, the god of wind and the god of plants respectively. Even his skills are references to the myth, with Gardener referring to the plant god and Sacrificial Defender referring to the wind god. He retains his cowardly nature from the myth, and his role as a bodyguard gets adapted into being a bodyguard for Hakumen. There's more inspiration to be found in his Hot Paradise unit, which I'll cover when we get there. And speaking of their units, Lifewonders tells Hombre Tigre they love all their transients equally before pulling Xolotl aside and letting them know it's him. And it's not by a little, it's by a lot. You know how I see 3 stars as basically worthless? Well, Xolotl's an exception to that rule. In fact, I'd put his 3-star over his 4-star since they both have the same skills, but his 3-star has a lower cost. I like his first skill the most since it's a decent heal skill for what it's worth. It's certainly not the best healing skill, but it works in a pinch. Next up is Blood of the Beast, which is just bland, but hey, a defense boost is a defense boost. Sacrificial Defender is a bad skill because of his proc rate, thankfully his other skills make up for that. Finally, we have Shapeshifter, a reference to Xolotl's shapeshifting abilities in the myth. And, it's an attack boost, I'll accept it. Xolotl's definitely on the worst side of okay, but it's something I could see fitting into an extra space, or on some 3-star only team. Who pairs well with Xolotl? Well, anyone really. His skills are really simple and generic, any team could benefit from his regen, and he makes for a decent attacker if you really need it. With his standard units out of the way, it's time for us to talk about his limited unit. Basically, Xolotl and a few others are transported to Ni no Kuni, basically Japanese hell, where artifacts don't work unless they're borrowed from someone else. Strangely, Xolotl did receive an artifact he once borrowed once he arrived in Ni no Kuni. You see, back in El Dorado, Xolotl managed to muster all his courage to venture with his brother Quetzalcoatl to the underworld. The artifact rule seems to be universal regardless of which world's hell you're at, so Xolotl and his brothers simply traded artifacts. Thus, Quetzalcoatl got the Twisted Bastion, and Xolotl got the Turquoise Snakes, of which you can see in his artwork. I've gotta say, Xolotl should have tried keeping the Turquoise Snakes because god damn, this unit is good. His skills are really unique, enough that I'm not too sure how to use them best. His first skill gives him a 40% proc to get crit on buff and a terrible proc for extra CP. More importantly, he deals 100 times damage to enemies with evasion, which is super good for high difficulty quest. His second skill grants evasion after moving to every ally on the board at phase start, alongside evasion to himself and bind resistance. His third skill gives him nourishment for extra staying power and a pretty good CP boost and a fantastic weakness spread. His fourth skill is the Crown Jewel with grant crit after moving to every ally on the board alongside a mediocre tenacity buff and some direct HP reduction. Hot Paradise Xolotl is really weird because he can either do really well or really badly entirely depending on the team composition. For example, Hot Paradise Xolotl with Sanat Kumara, and any attacker of your choice really. As long as you don't move Sanat, he should be able to re-spread those really great once moved buffs to your other units. Even if you don't have someone who can spread buffs like Sanat, you can still build a really good weakness team thanks to Xolotl's weakness spread. Overall, Xolotl got treated better than most other characters, with all of his units being above average for the time they were made. With his units out of the way, let's take a gander at Xolotl's relationship chart. Maria likes Xolotl because they're both nice people who enjoy helping others. Hakumen likes Xolotl, and she better considering that's her bodyguard. Xolotl himself likes Garmier? This guy, because they're both guard dogs and that's a total vibe. No one dislikes Xolotl, but he does dislike 2 people. The first of which is Ophion, and considering he did try to kill Hakumen, yeah, that's fair. The next one caught me by surprise. Xolotl dislikes Zurong. We can find the reason in the description for his Hot Paradise unit. He will never hate children who run off to dangerous places, but they do make him anxious and frenetic as he remembers his past. Fair enough, Xolotl. Fair enough. And before we go, he does have one loading screen with him and Hakumen. It says, "Get a grip," as she fixes his tie. And that covers just about everything you need to know about Xolotl. He's pretty mediocre in the story, so I hope they explore more of his guilt and feelings towards his home worlds as they did in the event. I rate him a 3rd wheel out of 10. He's not a bad guy, but I could definitely stand to see less of him. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Maybe leave a comment about which transient you want to see next, and I'll see if I can fit it into my schedule. No promises. As always, this is Fuuri signing out.